Hi, Tina. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to chat with you.
I love that we have some mutual friends out here in California. How are you doing, by the way?
Oh, it's been heavy. It's been a really heavy time with so much loss and so much need. But I've got my girls and my support. I've got an amazing family, and I've got some good tools, and I'm using them all right now.
All right, Tina, before we jump into all of your wisdom and tools, tell me everything.
My plan was to be a stay-at-home mom. That's what I wanted to do more than anything. And I got married at 22. So I went to Baylor and went to grad school. I was going to be a high school English teacher. I taught English for a brief period of time. And then I went into mental health stuff. But my plan was to just like teach high school English and have a bunch of babies. So my husband's an English professor, among many other things. Now he runs our clinical practice. I started it 9 years ago because I was like, most mental health people, like they're just looking at symptoms, and I want to peel the layers back.
You also phrase things that that anybody can follow. It's so practical the way you talk about things.
Well, that's kind of my brand, is to take the complicated science and make it accessible. That's what I try to do. But we're mental health, neuropsych evals across the lifespan. So that's like obviously learning disabilities, autism, cognitive decline, ADHD, all that stuff. Educational therapy, occupational therapy, and speech and language. So we're interdisciplinary. So Scott gets a job at Mount St. Mary's. We move out here. I have an 18-month-old, and he's like, we can't afford to live on my salary. You have to go back to work. And I was like, fine, let me get a PhD really fast so I can be a professor.
I told you this is my smart friend. Yep.
Yeah. So I was like, then I can be a professor. So USC offers me a full scholarship. So I go and get a doctoral degree. And the plan is to be a professor. But I'm one semester in, and I'm a really curious person. So I'm a really frustrated grad student because I'm like learning all this stuff. Well, this therapy is the most efficacious for this diagnosis. And I'm like, okay, but why? Like, what's the mechanism for that? So then I heard Dan Siegel, who was my co-author. He's kind of the rock star of the mental health world. I heard him speak, and he talked about this field of interpersonal neurobiology, like how the brain changes from particularly relational experiences. And I was like, I have to study with this guy. So while I was in grad school and while I kept having babies, I was driving to the West Side for an intensive study group that I did with him for like 8 or 9 years.
What did your mom friends say about this? Like, where are you going, Tina?
I know. I was like, I got class. I got to go to class. So then I started learning all the science about the brain. I was like, oh my gosh, if parents or teachers or mental health people knew this, it would change everything about what their kid's tantrum means. And so I went to Dan, who had 2 books out at the time, but wasn't a huge name yet. And I was like, I want to write a book with you. And everybody wanted to write a book with him. He was like, oh, write the proposal, I'll see. And then he read it, and he was like, oh, this is really good. And his agent
Were you the only one coming from like a mom perspective?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And I mean, I was in the trenches, right? And so he introduced me to his agent, who is Doug Abrams, who's the guy who wrote the Book of Joy with Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, and that's my agent. So I'm out on the Little League field. Scott's coaching, my husband's coaching. And Doug calls me, and he's like, there's a bidding war for the whole brain child. And I was like, what? Because I never planned on writing a book. But I was like, I have to get this to people. This is going to change everything. So I'm really proud of that book. But then I was like, I got to get out and talk to parents and teachers and all of that.
Guys, I brought in my smart new friend here to help us all for whatever anybody is going through. But specifically, I guess, just where we are in LA, it just seemed poignant to have you on. By the way, you're in the middle. You're about to launch a book, and you canceled your book tour just to help people.
Yeah, I had a family that lived with us over a week, 2 pets, and 4 people lost their home. And there are 8 or 9 schools that have been lost in my neighborhood. So I'm stepping in to provide some mental health support and support the helpers, not the first line workers, but the second line workers, like the mental health professionals and the school administrators and the teachers. So yeah, I felt like where I most needed to invest my waking hours was in mobilizing to help as much as possible.
I think if you don't live out here, it's sort of hard to comprehend. But for any of our listeners, I think they could take away nuggets that we're going to sort of give them today on how to navigate. So 17 years ago, I had a house fire and lost everything I own. Nothing compared to the communities being lost. But how does a house fire and losing everything compare to, say, a death?
It's very similar. Grief is such a unique experience. People experience it differently. But any kind of loss, our homes, our communities, they're not just things. They really are our identity, our culture, memories. It's really part of who we are. And so just like when we lose someone we love, when we lose the tangibles like our homes and the intangibles like community or a felt sense of safety, our brains and our nervous systems go into these pretty reactive states. And the other thing that's super important to know is that the brain is a huge association machine. So when we experience some experience of loss, like right now in LA, so many people have lost their homes or their neighbors' homes, their schools. The brain sort of is like anything related to grief get activated. So it can activate even previous times of loss and grief. But what grief really requires us to do is to remap our sense of safety and remap our sense of reality. So like when my dad passed away about 8 years ago, the whole first year was really disorienting. And I was really, I'm kind of a nerd, I have to admit. I love the,
I knew
the
we'd
science.
be friends.
Yeah. And so even while I was experiencing the heartbreak of grief, I was also really curious and observing myself experiencing it. So for example, the week after he passed away unexpectedly, I would notice that when my phone would ring, I would have a startle response, or any noise would make me have a startle response. My nervous system was really hyper wired at that moment, like really reactive. And so then I would go, oh, that's really interesting. I'm noticing that I'm really sensitive right now to sound or other things. I'm really jumpy. And what I realized during that year as I experienced it was that it took a full year for my brain to remap the idea of reality without my dad in it. And I think that's what a grief process is, whether it's a divorce or a loss of a home or a loss of a pet or even a transition. Like many of us we both have seniors in high school. We're getting ready to kind of move into adjusting to that child going off to college. That's a loss. It takes time for our brains to remap the rhythms of our days and our lives with this piece missing.
I love the way you phrase that. And you're going to give us some tools to work with. One of your many New York Times bestselling books, The Power of Showing Up. First of all, I love that title. Probably more important than ever now is showing up for everywhere. But let's break it down to 3 areas. Okay, how do we show up for ourselves? Let's say the caretaker during this moment.
Huge. Okay, so when we're talking about the power of showing up, this whole book is really the idea of 70 plus years of research that look at how do we turn out when we grow up based on the repeated relational experiences we've had. And really the science tells us that what we need most as mammals is what's called secure attachment. Okay, secure attachment is an inborn drive to be connected and protected, particularly when we're in times of distress. So when we're talking about a parent-child dynamic, what our children need most from us is to be their secure attachment figures. But because we are mammals, we have those needs throughout our entire lifespan. So here you and I are not children anymore. We have attachment figures too, and those tend to be our significant others, our best friends, maybe a sibling, and our parents may still be that person. But it's the person or people you most want to call either when things are great and so you want to celebrate something, or when you're devastated by something. Those are your attachment people, okay? So as mammals, when we're in distress, we most need to be connected and protected by these attachment figures. How do we do that? Well, in the book, we talk about the 4 S's. The first one is safe, and that's really a felt sense of safety in our nervous system, right? Not just in our environment, but in our bodies, feeling safe. The second one is seen, and seen is about tuning in to our own internal landscape or someone else's, where you feel really known and seen beyond just your behavior, but known. The third one is soothed. And that's really where someone shows up for you in a way that helps you feel safe and regulated and taken care of. Helps you when you're falling apart, get back to your baseline. And then the 4th S is secure. And the idea is that when we have repeated experiences of feeling safe and seen and soothed by somebody else, an attachment figure, it allows our brains to wire to know that if we have a need, someone's going to see it and show up for us. So that's really what the power of showing up is about. So when we're talking about showing up for ourselves, now really our kids, no matter how old they are, I have a 24-year-old and a 21-year-old
come back,
and an
thank
18-year-old.
goodness.
They still need, they need me to show up for them. They need to feel safe and seen and soothed and secure and knowing I'm going to show up all the time still. I need that. And I can't do that for my husband or my kids or my best friend or anyone unless I've got enough of it myself. So that means I need to show up for myself and pull in my people that can do that for me. So we can really walk through each of these. And let's talk really for a minute about this first piece of safety. Because when people show up for us and help us feel safe, it's not just an emotional experience like, oh, I feel really safe right now. It is. It's an emotional experience, that felt sense of safety. but it's also a physiological state. You can't really separate emotions from our physiology. So like, for example, when you're feeling really anxious, your heart's beating faster, your body temperature is hotter, you're breathing faster. So when we have a felt sense of safety, there's a whole physiological nervous system profile that goes with it. We can be really intentional for ourselves in giving ourselves cues of safety. Now, right now in Los Angeles, besides all the stuff that people see on the news, there are some things that are happening all the time that disturb a felt sense of safety. For me, I was sound asleep yesterday morning, finally sleeping. We're not having to evacuate right now. And it's like, okay, my nervous system is like, I can sleep. But loud helicopters overhead, right? So I woke up out of a dead sleep, and that disrupts a felt sense of safety. We also have a lot of wildlife running up and down our streets.
Yep.
Tons of coyotes. I've seen 3 of them today. The Watch Duty app's letting us know something's going on. So when we have these cues of threat that are coming in externally, we can actually provide our nervous systems with cues of safety. So what does that look like?
How do we do that?
Yeah, you're like,
tell me. I'm like, sign
get the
me
list
up.
out. There's a million actually, and everybody's a little bit different. But there are some basics that are science-based that are cues of safety. Think about it this way, Kit. If we're in a threat state, like we know something bad's happening, there are things we would not do. We wouldn't put on music and dance or sing. We just wouldn't sing. We wouldn't be singing to Fleetwood Mac. We would be hyper-focused on whatever the threat is.
Yeah.
When we're listening to music and we are singing or humming, our nervous systems know that that would not be something we would be doing if we were in a state of threat. So just listening to music and singing is a huge cue of safety. Listening to bird song doesn't even have to be real. It can be like on an app or something like that. Because think about it, birds stop singing if there's a predator nearby.
Oh.
So just listening to bird song is another cue of safety. Laughter is a huge cue of
My
safety.
favorite.
And so is play. So if we are playful and silly, laughing, these are all things that can give us cues of safety. Other things we can do are breathing deeply and slowly.
Mm-hmm.
We do the opposite of that when we are in a state of
Yes.
danger. And long, hot baths or showers. Like these are all things that you would never do when you're in a state of threat. The other thing is we can't totally isolate ourselves from continuous threats when something hard is going on. But we can be meaning makers for ourselves and for the people around us. So for example, when I heard the helicopters, I woke up and my heart was racing. And instead of just going, oh no, I wonder what's going on, I do a little self-talk.
Okay.
And I say, okay, helicopters are letting me know there's something I need to pay attention to here. And that's really what our alarm systems and our threat systems are supposed to do for us. They keep us safe. So I say, I'm going to check my app. So I check, there's no danger nearby. And then I immediately re-cue the meaning of that by saying, the helicopters are out checking things to keep us safe. So I literally just have some self-dialogue.
Talk yourself through it. And then
that
what do
creates
you
a cue of
do with
safety.
your children? So if you've got children in
Yeah.
that moment, so you're now monitoring yourself
Yeah.
for safety. How do we parlay that to our children?
Okay, I have to tell you about a really weird experiment. I don't know why they did it. I think it was a group of farmers that decided this was important information. But they took a group of chickens and they freaked them out. They scared all of these chickens. Now, chickens are not very smart. But the point of this was to figure out what helps chickens calm down the quickest, okay? The chickens that stayed freaked out the longest were the chickens that were looking in a mirror. Now, chickens don't have theory of mind, so they don't know that they're looking at themselves. They think they're looking at another freaked out chicken. Now, I love this story because we really are meaning makers for each other. And when you think about like an infant or a toddler that falls and bangs their knee, and if we freak out, if we're like, oh my gosh, are you okay? They have a huge response, right? But if we're like, oh, you scraped your knee, come here, let's check on you. And you kind of have that equanimity and that calm, it creates a different meaning for them. So we as caregivers, and particularly as parents, have a responsibility to be meaning makers for our children about the reality and being truthful, but also showing resilience and even modeling, providing cues of safety for ourselves. So one of my favorite strategies in my first book that I co-authored with Dan Siegel called The Whole Brain Child, the second strategy in the book is called Name It to Tame It. And it's based on a bunch of science that shows that when we accurately name what we're experiencing and feeling, it helps calm down the reactivity in our brains. It's probably why therapy or talking to our best friend or journaling help us feel better. So what I would say with our children is we want to provide cues of safety first and foremost by not being freaked out chickens,
Yep.
right? And then we want to name it to tame it. We want to say, this is scary. This is painful. Oh, this is so sad. So we feel it, right? We name it. We join
acknowledge
with
that
them.
it's there,
We
yes.
acknowledge it, right? And then we get to create meaning like, you know what? This is going to be hard and we're going to do it together. Or I'm not sure what the next step is, but I know how to figure that out. I want to think about it. So we basically are creating meaning that there are steps forward, even if we feel at a loss.
Yeah.
And if we're crying or we're devastated, name that and just say, I'm feeling really sad right now, or I'm feeling frightened, and I know what I can do to help myself feel safer right now. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to put on some music, and we can model those things. It's okay to not be okay as long as we create meaning around it.
Meaning around it so that we're not just a freaked out chicken looking in the mirror.
And you know what? If we are a freaked out chicken, it's okay as long as we go back, right? And be like, I was really freaking out earlier.
But here's what we're going to do.
And here's what we're
our
going to do
plan.
now.
Yes.
We've got this.
I love your freaked out chicken story. I'm going to use that with so many things in my
So
life.
don't be a freaked out chicken.
No, I'm not. Exactly.
Or if you are, go find your
find it.
girlfriends. Be freaked out with your girlfriends, and then you can come back and be a calm chicken with your kids. Yeah.
What are some specific things that people should do the first month after loss? Is there any practices?
Yeah.
So we both have so many friends that lost everything. I know that feeling, but now with the community,
Yeah.
what are steps that they should be taking to move forward?
Yeah. I think the first piece is to really monitor what you need, and it's going to change from moment to moment. For some people right now, and I'm certainly watching this with the people around me that have lost everything, is some people feel safer mobilizing. They want to start calling the insurance agency. They want to start setting up, furniture to be delivered at their new place, or wanting to find a place, or they want to get out and help other people. So for some people, mobilization feels safer and like they're more in control before they ever get to the kind of falling apart part. We talked about this during COVID a lot, is that when we feel helpless, if we can mobilize to help ourselves and others, it helps us actually have lower rates of PTSD. So we want to do that, but we don't want to do it to the degree that we don't ever let ourselves feel. One thing that is something that I haven't heard anybody talk about, but it's something that I used a lot when my dad passed away and when I've had friends who have lost spouses. Our sensory system, so think about our 5 senses, right? So our sound, taste, touch, all of those. Our sensory system is one of our largest parts of our nervous system that processes information. One of the best ways to provide comfort to ourselves right away when we've had a big loss, and even to our children, is to provide physical comfort. So even if we don't know what to do emotionally yet, right? Or we don't know who to call next or how we're going to do anything as next step because it's so overwhelming. And there's been so much help coming in that's wonderful, but it can also be overwhelming too. This is going to sound strange, but it is super powerful.
Tell me.
Cozy blankets, comfort foods, warm beverages in our hands, like cozy pajamas. Like these physical pieces of comfort are not only cues of safety, but they really do settle our nervous system. I like to think about, and this is a little bit oversimplified, but our brains are either in a reactive state where we're not really thinking super clearly, or we're in a receptive, kind of regulated state. And when we're in a regulated state, that's when we can really make decisions and pause before action and be our most efficient selves. The way we can move from reactive to receptive states is through our sensory system. Again, listening to music, putting on really comfy clothes, having a comfort meal. These kinds of things are a great immediate first step for us.
I was going to ask you how we stay regulated when so many of my friends are so deregulated now, out of their routine. Now I know what to do. For us on the outside, what can we do to help? First of all, is there something you can say to somebody who's grieving or gone through this loss? And there's something that we should not be saying.
Well, I would say let's go back to the idea of the power of showing up, right? What they need most from us is to feel safe and seen and soothed and secure, knowing we're going to show up for them, right? That's what they need. I think the most important part is the power of just our presence. Oftentimes, it's not even what we say. It's more the nonverbal stuff. It's just showing up with our presence and being there. I think sometimes when we try to help, we're like, well, what do you need? And do you want this? And we're asking them to make a lot of decisions. Yes. And sometimes it's helpful to just, if you don't know what to say, it's okay to say, I don't know what to say, but I love you and I'm here.
And I'm here for you.
I think that's so huge. I want to play with the word regulation for a minute, if that's okay?
Please.
So people use the word regulation a lot. My co-author, Dan Siegel, has the best definition, I think, of regulation. And it's the ability to monitor and modify your state.
Okay.
So you're monitoring, you're like, oh, I'm feeling really sad, or I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And then the modify is like what you're going to do to help feel better. So the next step in response to your question is, what is co-regulation? So co-regulation is when someone else monitors and helps you modify your state. So when we have friends who have had loss, we're really trying to tune in to what's going on. What we shouldn't say is, at least you can rebuild. You didn't love your kitchen anyway, or someone else has it worse than you. Like, what you really want to do is tune in, validate, and give the experience of, I love you, I'm here. It doesn't even matter what we say, as long as we're helping them feel that feeling from
And
us.
for kids that have lost everything, younger kids,
Yeah.
or even ours, I guess, in high school, what can their friends be doing? I feel like there's a lot of jokes or things moving around. I have a bunch of boys currently living at my house that lost their homes.
Yeah.
They're very much a community. Is there anything better that I could be doing or saying to sort of help this all the way around? Because I think about when you don't have a place, your home base, that is really...
It's really disorienting.
It's really disoriented.
Yeah. You providing space for them to come together is the very best thing you can do. That's what we most need when we have loss or devastation or we're struggling in any way, is community. And really, that was one of the hardest things about COVID, is we couldn't come together.
Yeah.
We couldn't have that community. Bruce Perry is a traumatologist. He wrote a book with Oprah. He's one of my heroes. And my favorite quote from him is the idea that the most powerful human healer is love. And so you providing space for those boys to come together and have community is huge. Providing food, which I'm sure, our teenage boys, they're on the newborn eating schedule
really
every
are.
2 to 3 hours.
They
It's
really
like
are.
a newborn. That is a cue of safety too. If you have a friend, whether you're little or big, you might feel guilty if you're having fun or you're laughing about something. I think it's really important for people to know that when there's been a loss, it's okay to have multiple feelings. You can feel devastated and in grief and or terrified still, and have moments where you're laughing and have moments of joy too. And so our kids shouldn't feel guilty if they're having fun with their friends who have lost things. That might be such a relief from
It really
that
is.
time as well. And the other thing that's crucial for kids and families who have lost everything is to have some whiffs of rhythms of normalcy.
And how do
Nothing's
you
going to be
get
normal
that?
for a
Nothing.
really long time, but like being able to go back to school and see your friends. If they typically go, my teenager loves to golf with his friends. If they can go golf, if kids are used to coming to your house, you open your house up for that. So letting them get back into some rhythms of normal is also really helpful.
We've got some listener questions.
Oh,
Are
great.
you ready, my friend?
I
Here
love
we go.
it.
I can't stop crying. The pain and loss is so deep. My entire foundation is gone.
Yeah.
On top of this, I feel like I've completely screwed up how to handle this with our middle school and high school age kids because I'm inconsolable. Have I screwed them up forever?
Yeah. Well, before I talk about I can't stop crying and what mom can do, I want to say that one of my favorite things that we wrote about in The Power of Showing Up is the idea that when we mess up or think we've messed up as parents, the research tells us that as long as we repair with our kids, it's actually beneficial for them that we messed up with them.
You just made my day.
Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes in that book is, history is not destiny. And we mean that in multiple ways. It means like the way you were parented is not your destiny for how you have to parent if you don't want it to be. But we also mean like, if you don't like the way you parented in the last hour or the last week or the last 5 years, the brain is extremely plastic, meaning it changes from repeated experiences. So the minute we start providing new kinds of experience, the brain wires for that, okay? So what does repair look like? I love to tell a story, and this is a little bit different from this scenario, but I was playing Yahtzee with my 3 boys, and they were probably 12, 9, and 6 at the time. They started fighting with each other, and what I should have done is said, guys, this isn't fun for me, and so I'm done playing. Unless you guys can get along, I don't want to play. That's what I should have done, set the boundary. I didn't do that, and it kept escalating, and I know I'm getting ready to move into a bad parenting moment for me. My slippery slope is biting sarcasm and immaturity. So I immediately start with sarcasm, like, guys, I'm so glad we're having game night. What a great time I'm having. And they kept going. And eventually I threw the dice across the room and I yelled, and I did not yell Yahtzee. I yelled at them, and I was a crazy person in that moment, right? And so one of the things I force myself to do when I act insane like that and take things out on my kids is to make myself look at their faces. And as soon as I do that, it helps me get regulated again because I'm like, oh, wow, look at the impact I just had. And so then it's time to repair. Now, here's this moment. Let's break this down. I've been scary. I've been unkind. And it doesn't feel good. And there's a messiness of conflict in the relationship in that moment. But because every time I do that, I repair with my kids, they're feeling this discomfort that happens when there's messiness in a relationship or when they're worried about me or I'm insane. But they also know that within a few minutes, I'm going to come make it right with them. And that is relational resilience, because they're like, oh, I don't have to get too upset because I know she's going to come make it right. So I can handle this discomfort. And repair can simply be coming back into a relationship. And for me in that moment, what that was, boys, I got mad and I did not handle that well. I'm so sorry. I wish I had handled that differently. Can I have a do-over? Will you forgive me? Now let's go to this mom. She's crying inconsolably. Crying and having huge emotions when you have a loss does not mean something's wrong. That is an appropriate response. And I think our society has over-pathologized negative emotions. Crying when you have a loss and being inconsolable, that is probably a healthy response for her, given the acuity of this, right? So that doesn't mean she's done anything wrong. She's feeling that and she's expressing it. Now, what I would say is, if she ends up feeling stuck in that and needs some support, there are so many people who are offering free mental health services. There's tons of resources out there.
I think she's feeling like, oh gosh, I'm not showing up for my kids. Like they need me now and I'm a mess and I can't get it together to show them safety, soothing, everything that they need.
So what's amazing though now is mom has an opportunity to say, I have been so sad and I know you're sad too.
Yeah.
We are in this together. And our job is not to protect our children from everything. It's our job to walk with them through it. Her children are sad too. Come together, spend time together, be together. Maybe you start writing memories of that place together. Ask kids, what is it you need right now? And if you're not sure, let me know in a little while. Like what this mom can do, this would be a beautiful thing. Ask your kid, show me the funniest meme or video you've seen in the last week.
Love that.
And laugh at screaming goats, whatever it is, but it's shared attention on something, whether it's around the loss or not, can really bring them together. If she's worried about this, if she's asking this question, what that tells me is she's someone who has made 1 million deposits in showing up for her kids.
Yep.
And right now they can be sad, but they're together. That's what matters most.
Oh, she's going to love hearing that. All right, here we go. Everything is in flux daily. Where we'll stay, where we'll be. We still don't have a place to stay consistently. We're constantly moving from hotels, people's guest rooms. My kids are elsewhere on other people's couches. How do I keep us together as a unit?
Yeah. So if there's some sort of family tradition, like if they typically do pizza on Friday nights, any kind of typical rhythm, if they can have at least some of that to some degree, that can be really helpful. But what I would recommend is doing something that's fun, having a break from the heaviness of all of this. And if it's hard to do that, even a movie or something where you can kind of like check out, I think going and grabbing a meal together, going for a walk together. And the other thing is, if it's not too sad, and again, people have to decide the right timeline, pulling up memories from whatever today's date is, go back on your phone, look at today's date on your phone over the last several years. Our kids usually, no matter how old they are, they typically love looking at pictures of themselves when they were babies and toddlers. So pulling up family memories, family books, and really remembering the idea that, yes, we've lost our homes, but we have not lost our family, and our family is wherever we are. And so find times to come together and pull up some memories.
I love that thinking about grief. Did you do that with your dad? Like bring up pictures and talk about it and look at it. What a beautiful way to sort of acknowledge and move forward.
And I think sometimes people are afraid to do it. People are afraid to bring up a lost loved one, or they're afraid to bring up something about the house. Don't say anything about the house. But people really want their things and their people to be remembered.
Yes.
So to say to someone like, I remember when we came over to your house and we did that hilarious like skit in your backyard or whatever it was, bring those memories up. That can be really helpful for people to know that those things are not going to be forgotten.
Here we go. The mom guilt is massive right now. I was the parent who did everything in our house, knew where everything was. My kids keep asking me if I remembered to grab certain things of theirs. I had to say no every time, and then I'd start crying. We only had time to take our essentials. What am I supposed to say to them? I feel like I failed them.
Yeah. I think, Mom, I want to just talk directly to you. You did the best you could given the circumstances. You weren't given enough warning. And I will say, I was actually in Las Vegas when everything was starting to burn and I couldn't get home at first. And as soon as I got home and I had time to think about it, I wandered around not knowing what to grab. Your brain doesn't work in that moment. So you did not fail your children or yourself or anyone else. Your brain was in a reactive state to hyper-focus on what was most important, and that was your people, right? And so you may not have even remembered important things, but your brain can't really do that in that moment. So please forgive yourself. And I would want to encourage you to use a lot of self-compassion as you're feeling guilt. Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, has a beautiful TED Talk about self-compassion. But I remember after my dad passed away, someone told me about Sylvia Boorstein's, like a quote from her, where basically when you notice you're feeling grief or guilt or whatever, a really difficult emotion to feel, is to put a hand on your chest and talk to yourself and say something like, sweetheart, you are in pain, or sweetheart, maybe that feels too precious to you. That's fine. You can just say your name. Like I could say, Tina, you are feeling really guilty right now. First, let's take a breath and then we'll decide what to do. So you're slowing things down and you're naming it and you're creating a space for yourself to feel it. And then you want to talk to yourself like you would talk to your best friend, like, you were amazing. You got your family out. There were things that got left behind. That's understandable given the circumstances. Had you had more time, had you had a brain that was able to function, under normal circumstances, you would have done things differently. I think what this mom wants to do is protect her kids from the pain. And so anytime she says, no, I didn't grab that, she feels so guilty, because what that really is she feels really sad for her child's loss. Dr. Eliza Pressman is one of my dear friends and colleagues. She's a developmental psychologist. One of my favorite things she says is, we want so much to protect our children from the weather, but we cannot do that. And in this case, specifically fires. Our job is to prepare them for the weather and to weather the weather, right? And to really just empathize. So what mom can do in that moment too is just say, I'm so sorry that didn't come with us. That is really sad, isn't it? And you just empathize with it and feel it.
Then you put the cozy blanket and the warm hot chocolate.
Exactly.
We got evacuated in the middle of the night. But I kind of knew it was coming, right? I'm watching my phone all night, so I should have packed a bag. I, in that moment, again, somebody who already lost everything they've owned, I just walked out with my family members and my animals, and I got in the car. There wasn't one part of me that wanted to grab anything but my people, and I could have. And I was like, I got all. I learned from that fire. I've got all that I need. And I understand the loss of it, but I think when you've gone through it, once you get settled, I think of all the people that are still displaced, you just kind of start the slow rebuild. And there's something, and I know I'm accused of rose-colored glasses, but quite beautiful about the rebuild once you're all safe there together. And this is not with the lives that are lost, but with the build.
It's really sweet, the family that was living with us who lost everything. One of the daughters, what she was saddest about initially was all of her books that she had marked in, and she loved her books. And her mom, who's a mental health professional, said, it's really sad that those books are gone, but what will be really fun is thrifting on the weekends to treasure hunt to find those books again and more books.
I love that.
And she just lit up. It made such a difference for her to know that that's a kind of new adventure.
New adventure.
Yeah.
Change. What other questions are you being asked right now by parents?
I think the biggest one is around the mom guilt. When we look at parenting trends, one of the things that's really common for this generation, and I'm super guilty of it, and I bet you are too, is overfunctioning for our kids.
Always.
And so actually a question I'm getting a ton of right now is like, how do we help our kids be resilient, right, around any kind of adversity? How do we build resilience? Resilience is not built by never having anything difficult happen. So when we have adversity, that's how we learn to be resilient, is by dealing with difficult circumstances, experiencing painful, difficult emotions. That's how we build those muscles with enough of someone showing up, right? So like think about stress. So there's positive stress that helps us get up and get our things done. There's tolerable stress, and that's where something really horrible happens, but we have enough support, we get through it. And then there's toxic stress, and toxic stress is where it's trauma, it overwhelms our capacity to weather it, or it's so chronic that we never get a break and our nervous system stays in these heightened states of hypervigilance. The way that we become resilient is by working through tolerable stress. And it becomes tolerable, again, through the power of showing up and through connection. So know that these adversities, while they're painful and we wish we could prevent our children from feeling them, it's like when we lift weights, which we should be doing all the time, especially at our age. As we lift weights and we get those reps, we build those muscles. That's how resilience is built. And this is an incredible opportunity for our children to build resilience. And like you have a new resilience from the fire you experienced 17 years ago, where you're like,
I just walked out.
I know how to do this.
I know how to do this.
Yeah.
What are kids asking you these days? I know you counsel a lot of different ages.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are asking, when will it feel normal again?
Yes. How do you answer that?
Yeah, I think we break it down. Here's what's really interesting about kids. And as a pediatric and adolescent psychotherapist for many, many years, oftentimes when kids are really sad, they're asking about when will things feel normal again. And sometimes that happens like after their parents divorce or after they move or after their pet dies. It can be all kinds of things. Or when they're asking like, when will I feel like myself again? Or they're afraid about something. Usually they have one or two very specific things in mind. And this is true even for high school and college age students as much as it is for little kids. When we can get specific about what they're really thinking about, we can start problem solving. So let me give an example. I was one of my clients many years ago. It was time for her to go to sleepaway camp. And she was like, I'm not going. I hate sleepaway camp. That's the last thing I'm going to do. So she had a lot of oppositional behavior around it, which tells us there's a defensiveness there because there's a vulnerability underneath it. So literally, I asked her a very simple question, and it's a great question to ask kids when they're afraid or sad, and that is, what is the thing you're thinking about the most? And she said, I'm afraid I'm going to have an accident in the middle of the night. And that was the whole thing around resisting. So we actually came up with a whole plan around she could tuck a pull-up into her sleeping bag, and it was rolled up. So she climbed into her sleeping bag. It was dark at night. She could switch out without anyone knowing and change out in the morning without anyone knowing. And then she was ready to go. So for kids who right now are asking about what their lives are going to look like, I would ask, what are you thinking about the most right now? And it might be, I miss this pair of pajamas, or I'm worried I won't have my school book, or I'm worried we're never going to have family pizza night again, or whatever it is. And then you can say, well, do you have any ideas about how to make that better right now as a first step? And when we do that and we ask them to be part of the problem solving, it doesn't just communicate with what we're saying, like, what ideas do you have? It also implicitly communicates, I trust that you are a problem solver, that you might be able to come up with ideas that are helpful. When we step in and we do everything for them, it actually implicitly communicates, I don't trust that you can handle this. So we really want to help mobilize them. Do you have any ideas? And this is even like 4-year-olds, you can even ask this.
Tina, you were so good. Where were you when my kids were younger? I need you now.
I like
this even now. This is fascinating, though. I love this. Okay.
So when your kid calls you from college, and they're like, oh my God, I have this horrible test and I stayed up all night.
What are you worried about the most? What a genius question to ask.
And what you want to do, here's what we want to do typically in this moment. So let's say your kid calls you from college. I stayed up all night. I'm freaking out. If I don't get a good grade on this test, I know I'm going to pass this class. What you want to do is criticize. My first instinct is to criticize. Like, well, why did you wait until the last minute? Why are you in this position? You knew this test was coming up, right? Or to minimize and be like, look, it's not that big of a deal. Just who cares if you get a B? So we want to criticize or minimize, or we want to mobilize and be like, okay, well, let me send you some bullet points. Let me go read the chapter. Okay, no. What our kids need most from us is empathy. So we want to not criticize, not minimize, not mobilize. We want to empower them to move into that problem-solving mode. So when your kid calls you and they have all of these things, instead of saying, "Oh, that sounds really stressful." Now in your mind, you're like, "You dummy! Why did you wait?"
Yes,
but in that moment, you're biting your tongue and you're like, "That sounds really stressful." And then here's my favorite parenting phrase of all time. What's your plan?
Love that.
Now, I need that phrase for myself too, because it reminds me when I say that it's not my problem to solve.
Yep.
What's your plan? So I have a high schooler now, and to me, I think sleep is still I think chronic sleep deprivation is a huge reason for part of the mental health crisis that we are
100%.
in. So I'm militant about sleep, even for my high schooler. So I might notice at 9 or 9:30, hey, it's getting pretty late. What's your plan for making sure you get a good night's sleep tonight? And he's going to go off to college, so I shouldn't be making those decisions and making those calls for him. I want him to start thinking about that. So I got to get him reps. That's how the brain develops those automatic
There's your
wiring.
reps you're talking about.
Getting those
Yep.
reps in. So I think in those moments, asking kids, what are you thinking about the most, and what's your plan for helping begin as a first step to address that? And then you can even say, I have some ideas too. Let's play with some ideas.
I can't tell you what that's going to change my life, how I go forward with my 3. I'm serious. Just those 2 questions right there. Let's talk about your new book coming out, The Way of Play.
Yeah.
Tell me about the
You
title.
know, I swore I wasn't going to write another book. I had already written 5, and I was tired. And I started an interdisciplinary clinical practice in Southern California, and I raised 3 kids, and I'm just tired, right? So I was like, I'm not going to write another book. But we know, especially coming out of COVID, some kids are struggling. They're struggling mental health-wise. They're struggling with developmental milestones. Teenagers, we're seeing a lot of mental health challenges, as I said. One of the things that we know is a protective factor against stress and mental health challenges is the ability to play. And we need it throughout our lifespan, not just the littles, right? Kids get fewer and fewer hours to play. What's replaced is screen time, academics, and structured activities, which are all perfectly fine in the right amounts. But kids don't get enough time to play. Adults don't get enough time to play. And here's the other thing. When I would talk to parents, they're like, my kid wants me to play with them, but I don't know what to do. Or once I get on the floor with them, I'm so effing bored doing it, I don't know what to do. So this book is 7 strategies in micro moments, so small, like 5 minutes, for strategies for how we can play with our kids, the way to healing, the way to processing difficult things, the way to knowing our children well in their first language of play is the way of play. So there are a couple of strategies in there that are great for our older kids as well. What I love about this book and is that it really is about bringing the way of play is a way of being as a parent too. It's not just sitting on the floor crashing action figures together. It's about playfulness. So those of you who have older kids, our teenagers' favorite thing is pointing out our hypocrisy and making fun of us. So if we join them in that.
If we join them, it's my favorite thing.
Playful. It's playful, yeah. So I'll just give one example that works across the lifespan, no matter how old your kids are, from the book called Make Yourself a Mirror. And there's some really interesting science that shows even when a couple has a romantic connection, if you videotape them, you find that they actually mirror each other in terms of their nonverbal stuff. So if one of them leans a little bit, the other one will lean similarly. They're not aware they're doing it.
Oh my gosh, fascinating.
So one of the best ways we can promote play and connection is by making ourselves a mirror. And we think about it in terms of the BFV, the body, face, and voice. So basically, if you have a little kid that's like, this guy's coming to get you. You're like, okay, I'm coming right behind you. So you just use the same kind of voice, right? So I think the idea is just if your teenager is like, ugh, and they make an exasperated thing and they have a face that's kind of sad, you go, oh, what is it? And you make the same face. And what that does is it communicates at a very deep brain level without even our conscious awareness. I see you. I know you. I'm here with you.
Yep.
It's a really powerful way to connect with our kids.
Tina, you are incredible. Thank you for all the insight today. You'll come back. We'll do a full deep dive on your new book. But thank you with everything going on. My producer, Harper, raves about you and everything you've done within our community and within all the schools and all the children. So thank you for taking the time. I hope this was helpful to everybody out there. Let me bring in my producer, Harper. Harper, wow, Tina Bryson. Yeah. She is so incredible. And I feel like a lot of tangible things that we could take away from what she said today.
Of course, we're talking about the fires and the devastation that's here in Los Angeles. So much of what she said is relevant to just loss in general. But I think the thing that I really loved is when she was talking about self-compassion, and she was talking about you put your hand on your chest and you talk to yourself. It's really sweet how she said sweetheart, as you're talking to yourself, love how would you speak to yourself as if you were speaking to your best friend, right? That's how we're supposed to talk to ourselves. And I loved that. So you and I have so many friends that are really going through a hard time, and we can't always wrap our arms around them and be close to them. And we want to do everything, but to have that self-compassion felt so healing.
It really did. And, the caretakers are usually the last ones to take care of themselves. All of our mom friends out there that are navigating all this, or all moms out there that are doing anything, or any caregivers. I thought that was great.
Yep.
I love the stuff at the end when it turned talking about kids and asking the question and what's your plan, and not be such a fixer. I've really got to work on that in my life. I love to jump in and fix everything.
Of course, we all do. We all do. And that's not what builds resilience. I just love she was talking about the reps and the sort of, even the resilience of you and having lost everything in a fire 17 years ago, however long that was, and how you approach this just kind of almost with ease. You approach a lot of things with ease, but approaching it with ease, knowing that it was going to be okay. How she's talking about history is not destiny, right? History is not destiny.
Let that sit. By the way, I'm glad you got it, but I love that. Whatever happened to you doesn't have to be your destiny.
That's right. Or how you're talking to your kids, or how you're handling things with friends right now. If you're angry, if you're resentful, if you're sad, if you're whatever's going on, be in it, recognizing it, name it, as Tina said. And
it can build stronger relationships and help you move forward. I love that.
with your friends, with your community.
So don't beat yourself up, parents, moms especially.
Right.
What was the chicken thing before we go? She had a great chicken thing.
I was just imagining when she was talking about the chicken, of what freaks out chickens is staring at a mirror. Is that what she said?
Because then the freaked out chicken sees
then
another freaked out
right,
chicken.
Well, thinks that's another chicken. So I think the best thing we can do, well, maybe we don't necessarily need to look in the mirror, all those little chickens, but the most powerful thing, as she was talking about, the power of showing up and the power of looking out, and either if it's mobilizing and taking control around things that you can do, or looking to people around you and how you can help, and just, or not even help, but just looking outward, can be showing up for ourselves, can be showing up for our kids, can be showing up for our community. So
the way of play. Now,
The way
Harper,
of
one
play.
thing I do well is
You play.
So this is going to be a good read.
she's extraordinary. She's a New York Times bestseller. She is brilliant, and there's so much good in what she just talked about. As we also said, we were taking January off. January was going to be the tweener between our two seasons, and this just felt like a really important episode to talk about just grief, but obviously something that's impacting our community so much right now.
Now she's in our toolbox in the Coop. She will be back to talk about many
right.
other things.
That's
so,
right.
Coop listeners, we hope you enjoyed that. A huge thank you again to Tina Payne Bryson for stopping by, and we'll see you next time in the Coop.